Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
In the stands designated for spectating students, Class 1A was watching the unfolding scene with varied reactions. I told him to not respond, and yet Ojiro shook his head in exasperation. But it shows how much he cares for Denki-chan, Ajui replied, finger to her lips. Still, is it possible for Akatani-kun to break out of the brainwashing? Yayorozu asked. Not as far as I know, Ojiro replied. When I was under that bastard's quirk, I didn't snap out of it until he deactivated it himself. That means Akatani is royally fucked, Jiro remarked. Across the section, noticeably isolating himself from his classmates, Bakugo silently agreed. If anything, he'd have to swallow his inherently overflowing pride and thank the mindfucker for finishing off his adversary. Kaminari, on the other hand, was panicking. He rushed down to the safety barrier, shouting with all his might, Akatani! Come on! Snap out of it! You can't lose now! Please man, snap out of it! Akatani heard his friend screaming, and trust him, he really wanted to snap out of whatever Shinso was doing to his body. He also heard President Mike commenting whether this was it for him as a participant, as the boundary line grew closer and closer. He knew he had to do something, fast. His screaming mind was of no use. His body refused to listen. He had to resort to something else, before he stepped over the boundary. His core? The line was very much in sight, he needed to act now. Focusing inwards, Akatani reached into his core, and acting on his first instinct, pulled. There was a slight pause. Then his core went supernova. At that same moment, a blinding light exploded across the stadium. People screamed, screwing their eyes shut and ducking away from the dazzling brightness. No one was spared, from the spectators, Midnight, Shinso, President Mike and Aizawa, to the students watching the spectacle. Kaminari fell backwards from the safety barrier, diving to the floor. Amidst the din, there was mad crackling of electricity, and more flashes of light. Before quite suddenly, the light and crackling noise disappeared as if someone erased them from existence with a swish of a magic wand. As people's eyes burned, on the field, Akatani was standing still, just a stride away from the boundary line. He blinked. He glanced down at his hands, flexing his fingers. Thank heavens, he was back in control of his body. But really, that experience was extremely surreal. It felt his body was blown apart with the light, only to reassemble when the light dissipated. No matter, he was back in control now, and thirsting for vengeance against the one who sullied Kaminari's character. With eyes glowing with erupting fury, Akatani turned around, and stormed across the field towards Shinso. The lilac-haired brainwasher had barely begun to pick himself up, when he was roughly hoisted up by the scruff of his uniform top. He had only just registered that when his head was forcefully swung sideways with a powerful punch to cheek, knocking a tooth out and sending it flying to the side like a projectile. Shut your trap, you motherfucking son of a whore. That snapped everyone's attention back to the field. What's this? Akatani managed to get out of Shinso's quirk. Shinso was unable to stop the next punch, layered with crackling electricity for extra pain. You have no right to whine. A roundhouse kick, and Shinso was on the ground again. A villainous quirk, you say? As if you are special. Akatani kicked Shinso right in the groin. Those watching winced hard. Oh shit. The Shinso family line might have just ended there. President Mike reeled. I can easily electrocute you, and kill you with a cardiac arrest. Death will come for you in slow, agonizing minutes, even hours, if I wanted to. Impervious to everything else, Akatani pounced on top of a groaning, half-conscious Shinso. To the horror of everyone watching, his hands grabbed the brainwasher's neck in a vice grip. You are no different from anyone here in UA. Just a single soul amidst hundreds. You complain and bitch about how everyone treats you badly because of your quirk. And yet you do nothing about it. Nothing to change the perceptions of others. Nothing to improve yourself. Nothing to prove yourself as a hero. Akatani's grip began to tighten, cutting off Shinsu's airflow. Midnight tried to intervene. Akatani, murder will not be condoned. Seemingly ignoring her, Akatani gripped harder, suffocating his opponent as he weakly grabbed at his hands. Shinsu's vision was already to darken at the edges, his lungs screaming. You will apologize to Kaminari, and Ojiro for that matter. Then, you will change that attitude of yours, actually work towards proving yourself as a hero, and actually prove to those who put you down that they are dead wrong. He tore one hand from his opponent's neck, keeping the other holding tight. Raising his free hand, electricity crackled. But first, hasta la vista. Akatani slammed his crackling hand onto Shinsu's chest. Like before, there was a flash of light, and it was all over. The stadium was dead silent. No one quite knew how to react to the sudden escalation of violence. As Akatani got up from Shinsu's unconscious body, Midnight finally broke the tension stewing in the air. As Shinsu Hitoshi is unable to continue, Akatani Makumo advances to the next round. Applause followed, but it was stilted and awkward. Akatani huffed, turning on his heel and stepping out of the ring without a single word, leaving Shinsu to be picked up by many robots to be taken to Recovery Girl. Back with the students of Class 1A, they were still stunned by the lengths their vice president went to advance. While they were happy he was able to snap out of the brainwashing and win the match, his tactics were much up for discussion. Man, I didn't know Akatani would go so far as to almost strangle someone to death. Kirishima muttered. Hitoshi-chan did insult Denki-chan's character, Azui replied, Makumo-chan has every right to be angry. But, to put someone's life on the line. Uraraka shivered. Akatani does have a malevolent darkness within him, Tokoyami remarked, Dark Shadow nodding in agreement. While I am glad that bastard got his arse handed to him, I'm not sure doing what Akatani did was the right way. Ojiro looked conflicted. But what Akatani said made sense, Jiro countered. If what he said was true, then Shinsu must get his act together if he truly wants to be a hero. Perhaps this near-death experience was what's needed for him to get his mind set straight. Ignoring the debate behind him, Kaminari was completely silent. His heart, however, was thundering. He had heard what Akatani had said during the match, after all. Yep, I'm definitely in love with Akatani. And speak of the devil, said love interest had just returned to the classes section. Kaminari willed his heart to calm down, before taking the seat next to his friend. You were amazing, Akatani. I don't know what you did, but you wiped the floor with his arse. Thanks, Kaminari. The rest of their classmates were unable to shake the uneasy feeling from watching the two friends converse amicably, not when one of them almost murdered his opponent in a fit of rage. But aren't you afraid that almost killing Shinsu would turn away most pro-heroes? Asked Kaminari. The key word is almost, Akatani pointed out, I didn't actually kill him. That would be a sentence to prison or the death penalty at worst. I merely focused on getting into his thick skull about his bitching about how unfair the world is. If the world is unfair, then he should change it, rather than rest on his laurels and spout meaningless words. But Akatani-kun, Yaoyorozu cut in, you let your anger overcome your better judgment. You could have easily got him out of bounds without almost strangling him to death. I'll admit that, the purple-haired teen conceded, but Shinsu needed that wake-up call to properly snap him out of his delusions. Furthermore, insult Kaminari, and I will not be responsible for my actions. The blonde's heart fluttered at that statement. But enough of him, Akatani turned the conversation away. Whose match is next? Candy Cane vs. Zero, Kaminari replied. Isn't your match right after them? Asked Jiro. Ah. You're right, the blonde got to his feet, I need to get going. See you later, guys. All the best, Kaminari, said Akatani, don't forget what we covered during training. I won't. And with that, Kaminari disappeared down the stairs towards the waiting room. Who do you think is going to win? Asked Yaoyorozu. Todoroki, hands down, was Akatani's reply. You seem pretty sure about that, Gyro remarked. Ice against tape? Akatani quirked an eyebrow. Zero was royally fucked. Hearing her own words being echoed, Gyro stayed silent, knowing the vice president absolutely meant it, and there won't be any surprise turnarounds in this match. Coming out of the East Gate is Spider-Man but with tape instead of web, Zero Hanta. Present mixed voice came over the air. A round of applause. And coming out of the West Gate, the Ice King of Class 1A, and the son of Endeavor himself, Todoroki Shudo. Akatani watched the bicolor-haired boy step into the field. He appeared mutedly calm, but there was a burning fury in his eyes. Something must have happened during his match that made Todoroki on the verge of exploding. Of course, Akatani didn't need to think that far. All leads pointed to Endeavor. And if his hunch was right, Todoroki was going to take out his anger on Zero. He could only feel sorry for his tape quirk classmate. I want a clean, fair match. Begin. Akatani got up from his seat and disappeared down the stairs into the stadium, already knowing the outcome of the match. Indeed, Zero only managed to wrap his tape on Todoroki's arm before an entire glacier of ice rushed forwards and encased him, and half the stadium, in a frigid prison. Todoroki easily got the tape off from his arm as Midnight went up to inspect the frozen Zero. Zero Hanta is unable to continue. Todoroki Shuto advances. The stadium applauded, apart from those frozen in the ice. Todoroki walked up to the towering glacier and started thawing the ice to free his classmate. No one noticed, but Todoroki did so with a heavy heart and eyes of sadness. While the match had been going on, Akatani roamed the corridors of the stadium idly, slushy in hand, waiting for the announcement for Kaminari's match. Turning around a corner, a wall of support equipment collided headfirst into him. He almost dropped his drink. Sorry. Rubbing his throbbing nose, Akatani peered over the equipment. Oh, Hatsum-san, it's you. Getting ready for your match? Yep, the pink-haired inventor nodded. Gotta get Mr. Engine Legs to put on my babies. Ida-san? I have a plan to advertise my babies to the sponsors, and it involves Mr. Engine Legs playing along with my pitch. Hatsum revealed. Akatani understood where she was coming from, but the plan didn't sit right with him. Hatsum-san, I don't think you should go with that. Oh? What do you mean? While advertising your equipment on the field will definitely get the sponsors' interest, Akatani explained, my gut feeling is that they would want more than just a regular pitch. They want to see your equipment being applied in a practical setting, a simulation of how they'll work against villains. I think your best bet would be to battle Ida-san head-to-head with the help of your equipment. Hatsum had a thoughtful look. And if it helps, Ida-san makes use of high-speed kicks in his fighting style. Also, that reciprocal burst move that he pulled during the cavalry battle? I think it impacts his engines for a while after he uses it, if my guess is correct. You might want to take advantage of that. That seemed to convince the inventor. Well then, I guess I'll take you up on the offer, Mr. 10 million points. But be warned though, if I lose my round, you're gonna be my guinea pig for the foreseeable future. Akatani shrugged, that's fine by me. I had been meaning to ask you about some changes to my hero suit. Don't know why exactly, but my gut instinct is that I would need it, the sooner the better. I think we can work something out that will mutually benefit the both of us, regardless of whether you win your round or not. Then we've got ourselves a deal, Mr. 10 million points. Hatsum nodded. The two shook hands, just as the announcement for the match between Kaminari and Shiozaki Ibara from 1B was about to start. Well, looks like my soon-to-be boyfriend is about to have his go. I'll see you around, Hatsum-san. All the best for your match. Make sure you win this festival, Mr. 10 million points. I call dibs on being your personal inventor. Akatani and Hatsum went their separate ways. Turning round a corner, the pink-haired inventor came to a sudden stop, her eyes widening in realization. Wait, what? Akatani returned to 1A's box just as the competitors were stepping out into the field. "Where were you?" Jairu asked. "Walking," Akatani shrugged. "Todoroki won, I presume?" "He did," Yayorozu nodded. Akatani hummed, turning his attention towards the field. "Match begin." Akatani noted Shiozaki's quirk, literal vines for hair. Made entirely of plant matter, it had the advantage of being immune to electricity. Kaminari would have to rely on physical attacks to get past Shiozaki. He just hoped his friend was able to apply what he taught him in their sparring and defensive lessons. Shiozaki made the first move, shooting out several vines towards Kaminari. The blonde quickly leapt to the side, sparing centimeters as the vines shot past. Picking himself up, Kaminari willed some electricity into a ball and threw it at Shiozaki. A bundle of vines intercepted it before it could hit her face, dispelling the electricity harmlessly. The same bundle shot towards Kaminari, forcing him to dodge again. Not one to go down without a fight, and knowing his crush was watching him, Kaminari swung his arm out, releasing a wave of electricity rushing towards his opponent. Shiozaki's eyes widened, and she quickly turned around, back facing him. The vines extended, encircling her in a protective cocoon. The incoming surge of electricity passed through harmlessly. "Shit, this is going to be tough," Kaminari thought to himself. Shiozaki's vines unfurled. His eyes narrowed. Kaminari cried foul battle, and charged forward, fist raised and pulled back to deliver a punch to any exposed area unprotected by the retreating vines. Shiozaki quickly shot more vines out to intercept the incoming punch. The vines wrapped around Kaminari's forearm, and pulled him to the ground. He grunted in pain. The vines had thorns, and God were they sharp. They dug into his skin, drawing blood. He needed to act fast. Kaminari grabbed the vines with his free hand, ignoring the sharp pricks, and pulled hard. There was a snapping sound, a small gasp from Shiozaki, and the vines broke free, growing limp as they fell. He tossed the vines to the side, and got up again. He needed to finish this quickly. He can't afford to drag this battle any longer. Shiozaki was shooting more vines at him. He needed to fight now. Kaminari readied himself. The vines were coming for his arms again. Instead, he grabbed them by the bundle, again ignoring the sharp stabs of pain as the thorns tore his skin. With a grunt, he pulled hard. The vines snapped clean off Shiozaki's head, some forcefully. While it was normal for her to shed and discard her vines on occasion, having so many ripped out at one go put immense strain on her temple, something she was not used to. Seeing his opponent hesitating with the pain, Kaminari saw his chance. Screaming loud and long, he unleashed his electricity all at once. There was another flash of light, though not as bright or blinding as the one that blanketed the stadium during the match between Shinso and Akatani, and the rush of crackling bolts. Merely closing one's eyes was sufficient this time round, not necessitating the duck for cover from before. The light was gone in a flash. Everyone opened their eyes again. Both Kaminari and Shiozaki were on the ground, unmoving amidst a layer of vines scattered across the field. Midnight stepped down from the platform, stepping over the vines to Kaminari. One look was enough for her to know that he was out for the count. While he wasn't spouting gibberish with his thumbs up as he normally would do after discharging all of his electricity in one go, his eyes were glassy and staring straight up at the sky, and there was some drool slipping down from his ajar mouth. She then stepped over to Shiozaki. At first glance, the vine-headed student also appeared to knocked out. But just as Midnight was about to call the match a draw, her limp form trembled. Slowly, with much groans of pain, Shiozaki picked herself up from the ground, rubbing her sore temple gingerly, and occasionally spasming from the residual electricity. Midnight raised her cat o' nine tails. Kaminari Denki is unable to continue. Shiozaki Ibara progresses to the next round. Amidst the applause, Yayorozu turned to Akatani. His expression was carefully empty, and he said nothing as he got up from his seat and disappeared down the stairs. "Do you think Kaminari is in for it by Akatani?" Jairu asked. Spying the stupefied blonde being escorted out of the field on a stretcher, Yayorozu turned back to her friend. I can't tell with Akatani, if you want my honest answer. Anything can happen. Akatani waited outside the makeshift infirmary for the Medibots to file Kaminari in before entering himself. He stood quietly by the side of a bed as the bots lifted his knocked-out friend on it. They went back to their charging points, leaving Recovery Girl to come over to assess the damage. Another typical case of quirk overuse, she said partly to herself and to Akatani, nothing else to be done other than the usual kiss. The purple-haired student watched silently as Recovery Girl planted a kiss on his friend's cheek. Kaminari's eyes fluttered shut. Satisfied, the youthful heroine moved on to the bed directly across to check on a still unconscious Shinso. Sparing only a glance at his previous opponent, Akatani went to grab a stool from a corner. Returning and sitting down, he watched his unconscious friend with the intenseness of a bodyguard watching over a prince he had sworn on his life that he will protect. Akatani observed Kaminari's peaceful expression, and the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The blonde looked so vulnerable right now, that even a child would have been able to take him on and win if accosted. Was Kaminari like this when he stayed with me after the entrance exam? Akatani wondered. Did he keep vigil until I came around? He eyed the wounds on the blonde's hands and forearms. The bleeding may have stopped thanks to Recovery Girl's quirk, but the spots where the skin had been broken was still evident even with the healing process sped up. Some were shallow, while others were deeper. The latter will definitely scar, he noted silently. His hand reached over, gently gripped Kaminari's right hand, and pulled it closer. His roughened fingers trailed over the uneven skin and scabs, as if willing them to heal faster. Akatani leaned forward, and kissed the cut softly, lips lingering for a moment, before moving to next one. Like a fairy tale story trope, Kaminari began to stir. His eyelids slowly fluttering open. Hey! Kaminari blinked, glancing over to his friend. Hey Akatani, what happened? You're in the infirmary. Akatani kept the blonde's hand in his hold. You electrocuted yourself during your match. My match. Kaminari took a moment to remember. Who won? It was a close-run thing. The surge of electricity knocked both you and Shiozaki to the ground. Shiozaki was able to get up in the end though, so she was declared the winner. Disappointment and melancholy flashed over Kaminari's eyes. Ah man, this sucks. I understand, losing isn't fun. It's more than that, Akatani. I've let you down. I fucked up. All the physical training you taught me before the festival, but it was all for nothing. I couldn't land one single punch on my opponent. I even overused my quirk again, when I was supposed to cut back on my reliance on quirk. I am so sorry, Akatani, I dash. Hey, Kaminari, stop. Listen to me, the purple-haired teen interrupted, left hand reaching out to gently cup his friend's cheek. Listen, I'm not disappointed in you. I'm proud of you. Really? Really, Akatani nodded, I am proud of you, even though you lost. You've already made progress, and today showed that. You were at a disadvantage because of Shiozaki's quirk, but you gave it your all. Do you see these scars? Kaminari nodded, the deeper cuts having healed into lines a shade darker than his original skin tone. These are testament to your strive to never give up. I watched you pull those vines off Shiozaki's head without even a care for the thorns cutting into your flesh. The previous you would have never done something like that. That you would have relied purely on his quirk, and the match would have just ended right there and then. But you were able to drag the match longer, to make Shiozaki work, rather than give her an easy victory. I'm proud of you, Kaminari, you did great this afternoon. The blonde's eyes became misty with emotion. Thanks man, I owe it to you. I know, Akatani pulled Kaminari close, training will continue, but we'll be progressing together. Kaminari's heart fluttered. Across the room, Recovery Girl watched the intimate moment in blissful silence. She sighed fondly, it was always refreshing to see such close friends supporting one another. She hated to be the one to interrupt the sweetness. You seem much better, Kaminari-kun, which is surprising, given how it will take a while longer for you to come around in such scenarios. Perhaps you two would want to head back up to join your classmates and watch the rest of the matches? We will, thanks recovery girl, Akatani nodded, helping Kaminari off the bed. The Medi heroine saw them off. As the two friends left, she couldn't help but notice, and smile, that they were holding hands. Akatani and Kaminari arrived back at 1A's section, just as the match between Ida and Hatsum was underway. Oh, you're back, Jairu remarked, all good? Yep. Kaminari chirped, sitting down. You're not hung up over your loss, asked Yayorozu. I was for a little bit. Kaminari put his hands behind his head, but one dose of Akatani was enough to perk me up from my slump. The person in question wasn't following the conversation, his attention instead on the current battle taking place on the field. Hatsum had taken his advice to heart. She had adopted a two-prong approach to tackling Ida, namely leading him around in a game of cat and mouse using her support equipment to stay ahead, while engaging in an advertising pitch with attending sponsors. Now, she was pitching the pair of boots she wore for the cavalry battle. See how Mr. Engine Legs is still keeping up the pace? He hasn't broken a sweat yet, and that's to be expected with villains with speed quirks. But, with fuel-powered, self-stabilizing rollerblades that can reach speeds up to 100 km per hour in 10 seconds, made by yours truly, villains, or anyone, for that matter, will be hard-pressed to keep up, especially in constrained spaces. Akatani looked around. He couldn't scan the entire stadium, but already he could see a few interested faces. But rollerblades are just only one feature, Hatsum continued, just managing to dodge Ida again, and having a single-use equipment is hardly enough these days. People want versatility, multiple angles tackled by one object. And Mr. Engine Legs here is about to demonstrate how things can change in a blink of an eye. Ida leapt forwards, leg pulled back for a roundhouse kick. How do you deal with incoming projectiles, like someone's leg? Well, you dodge, naturally. But instead of going down, you go up. Hatsum tapped a button on the boots. The wheels retracted back into the soles. Just as Ida was about to hit his target, Hatsum leapt into the air, arching over Ida and landing 10 meters behind him. Next prized feature, jump pad propulsion. Useful for that leap that could save your life, or your groin. Ida was getting frustrated. Like an enraged bull towards the red cape of a matador, he activated his special move. Recipro burst. Hatsum was unfazed. She merely leapt into the air, though this was a close call as Ida just missed her by inches. As she was descending, she continued her pitch. Of course, multi-feature equipment are good and all. But when paired with a supporting piece, we're talking twice the damage. And bigger chances of success. As she landed, Hatsum whipped out what looked like a standard-size pistol. And when you start small, you finish big. She pulled the trigger, and what looked like a small pellet was fired. But it didn't remain small for long. It rapidly expanded, until it became the size of a beach ball. Despite that, it retained its immense speed, shooting straight towards Ida like a comet. Ida had no time to dodge. Striking him in the stomach, the sphere did not stop as expected. The engine quirk student found himself being propelled backwards, straight out of the field, and into the concrete wall behind with an almighty crash. You can sleep safer knowing that you have the augmented pot shotgun by your side, made by, again, yours truly. Ida Tenya is out of bounds. Hatsum May progresses to the next round. The roar of applause was absolutely thunderous. Many couldn't believe a student from the heroics course was taken out by a support student. It had simply never happened before, until today. Akatani was proud of his previous teammate. She had made history today. So many stereotypes and misconceptions have been broken by Hatsum's inventions, and it pleased him greatly. Her performance today showed to the entire country that human ingenuity can trump the strongest of quirks when applied by the greatest the human mind can offer. Come to think of it, what was her quirk, if she has one, anyway? Akatani filed that thought away for future reference. He watched the pink-haired inventor bow and wave to the crowd, laughing ecstatically. If the sponsors weren't looking at her with interest before, they were certainly doing so now. On the other hand, there was Ida. Watching him peel himself off from the ground, Akatani could see the acute mess of emotion flashing across his usually uptight classmate: shock, disbelief, disappointment and anger, the last two primarily at himself for losing. Akatani felt a little bad for throwing Ida under the bus, revealing details about his abilities and moves to Hatsum. He briefly wondered why he did it, and the answer came straight away. His primary drive had not faltered. He wanted to prove to the world that powerful quirks do not immediately make a hero. Quirks only make up one aspect of a person becoming a hero. What society has forgotten that a person's skills, brains, thoughts and actions have equally important roles in making a hero from a person. So crucial, yet ignored by people who are blinded by superficial pomp and spectacle. That was blatantly wrong, and Akatani was driven to destroy that mass illusion with every bit of power bestowed upon him by that lightning strike so long ago. He had nothing against Ida as a person. But sometimes, sacrifices have to be made to change society. And besides, you win some and lose some. It wouldn't cost Ida much to lose the match, when there are still plenty of pro heroes out there who will scout him. Akatani figured it would be better if Hatsum got her well-deserved moment in the spotlight, and did her part for a less bigoted and prejudiced society. Whoa, I didn't know Hatsum-san's inventions were that powerful. Kaminari gushed. It's really intriguing to see how boundless the human imagination can be, Yaoyorozu remarked. Akatani nodded to himself. Change had taken its first steps forward. The next match passed in a blink of an eye. Ashita won her match after using her acid to render Aoyama's laser belt useless and slide him out of bounds. The next match between Tokoyami and Yaoyorozu was another interesting one, with no clear-cut advantage between sentient and creation quirks. But in the end, it also proved to be a fast one as the previous. On Midnight's flag-off, Tokoyami made the first move, sending Dark Shadow out to cut off Yaoyorozu before she could create anything that could repel it. The class president was pushed out of bounds by the sentient quirk, giving Tokoyami the victory. Akatani barely saw Yaoyorozu retreat back into the stadium as he was already moving. Rushing down the steps and through the hallways, he found his president barely keeping it together, one hand supporting her trembling body against the wall. Yaoyorozu looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Akatani didn't say anything, instead opening his arms to her. Yaoyorozu did not hesitate. The dam broke, and she flung herself into her deputy's arms. Akatani gently rubbed her back in an attempt to comfort her. Let it out, let everything go. I see couldn't do anything. It happened too quickly. Her sobs echoed in the empty corridor. I'm supposed to be a recommendation student. How could I let myself be so easily defeated? Any other words were lost to her tears. Akatani pulled away slightly, gripping her shoulders firmly. Yaoyorozu-san, this isn't the end. It was purely bad luck that you had to fight against a versatile quirk. This means nothing about you overall. You are an outstanding person, the leader of Class 1A. I can assure you that people will not be just looking at your performance today. They will see the rising hero to be with a powerful, versatile quirk, and they'll want to reach out to you. The sports festival is only one milestone that people will soon forget in favor of something else. You did your best against adversity, and that is all that matters to pro heroes watching today. The raven-haired girl sniffed and wiped away her tears. Her deputy's words of support helped numb the pain she was currently in a little. I know it's difficult to get through loss, but this is only one battle. The greater war that will lead to greatness continues. I am confident, Yaoyorozu-san, that you will emerge victorious. Akatani allowed a small smile, which encouraged Yaoyorozu to smile too, albeit a bit wobbly. I get it, Akatani-kun. I understand. Do you feel better now? I do. Thank you for keeping me steady. No worries, let's get back to the stands. The pair returned to the 1A seats. Kaminari and Jairu were, naturally, worried for their class president, but Yaoyorozu reassured them that she was going to be fine, wiping away the stray tear from her eye. So what's the next match, guys? Kirishima versus a guy from 1B, Tetsu, if I'm not wrong, Jairu replied. Their quirks are virtually the same, Akatani remarked. This match might be the most boring. Indeed it was. Both Kirishima and Tetsu were evenly matched, right down to their fighting styles and execution of blows. What started as a seat-edging duel slowly dragged into a repetitive free-for-all with no indication of a contestant gaining the upper hand over the other. Akatani could see plenty of bored faces and lost attention as the two slugged it out, eventually dealing each other one final, exhausted blow virtually at the same time. Both then crumpled to the ground, ending the match in the first ever dead heat. Midnight eyed the two fallen students, proclaiming, both contestants are unable to continue. A tiebreaker will be decided to determine who gets to progress to the next round. But first, to you Yamada. Thank you Kayama. Present Mix's voice cut through the air, as both Kirishima and Tetsu were carried out of the field. Well, dear listeners, we've now arrived at the final match of the first round. Already, the numbers are whittling down faster than Shoyuta is able to finish his juice packs. Akatani could almost hear his homeroom teacher sigh in the background. Now without further ado, let's meet the contestants. A loud metallic rumble echoed. Coming out of the east gate is the girl who is defying gravity and not letting anyone pull her down, Uraraka Ochako. Followed by another. And coming out of the west gate is unstoppable king of explosions, Bakugo Katsuki. Who do you think will win? Kaminari asked. My hunch is on Bakugo, but Uraraka will put up a good fight, Akatani replied. Those sitting around him did not miss how cold the purple-haired teen had become. While there had been warmth when he was comforting Yaoyorozu, everything had frozen over with the announcement of his sworn enemy. I want a fair match. Midnight raised her cat o' nine tails, contestants at the ready, and began. Screaming bloody murder, Bakugo let rip several explosions to intercept an advancing Uraraka. Again, dear listeners, Bakugo isn't holding back. Present Mix's voice could be heard over the din. Using the resulting dust clouds kicked up by the explosions, Uraraka moved stealthily to catch Bakugo off guard. But years of training with his quirk had sharpened the spiky-haired blonde of noises other than explosions around him. Just as Uraraka was about to lay her hand on his back, Bakugo had turned on her, setting off another large explosion to throw her back. Uraraka had barely hit the ground when another series of explosions threw her about like a ragdoll. Amidst the din, Akatani could hear disapproval from others in the stands. What is he doing? Is he trying to kill her? This is too much. Akatani really hoped that Bakugo was able to gather whatever little restraint he had to not murder a classmate. Even Midnight had the same thoughts. Bakugo. Murder will be dealt with to the fullest extent of the law. Not if round-faced dodges, the explosive blonde could be heard snarling over the noise. Akatani face-bombed. Bakugo was seriously not helping his case here. Rather scraped up by the near-constant barrage of explosions and hitting the ground, Uraraka realized her time was limited. She needed to act now if she stood any chance of using her quirk on Bakugo. Standing her ground, Uraraka stretched out her hands and pulled gravity towards her. The piles of rubble wobbled. Piece by piece, large and small, they began to rise and levitate towards her. Ignoring the beginnings of bile starting to rise from her stomach, Uraraka continued pulling, until she was completely surrounded by pieces of rubble like planets orbiting the sun. Grunting, she began tapping the rubble, making them rise upwards. And with a loud release, she cancelled her quirk, sending the rubble hurtling down towards Bakugo. Seeing him flinch for the barest moment, Uraraka dashed forward, despite her injuries, to lay her hand on the explosive blonde. She didn't expect the earth-shattering explosion to send her, and the rubble, flying backwards, though. The shockwave was so powerful, the entire stadium shook as if an earthquake was rolling in to level the entire area of the ground. The field was completely shrouded in smoke, dust, and fire, obscuring the fate of the two combatants from view. It took several minutes for the smoke and dust to dissipate, with lots of coughing and hacking to go with them. When the view cleared up, the first thing everyone noticed was Bakugo was still standing, just barely, and breathing hard. Uraraka was on the ground, propped up by her arms. Blood was pouring liberally from cuts and scrapes everywhere, and she appeared to be struggling to get up. Akatani observed her determination to continue, but deep now he knew the endgame was upon them. He was proven right. Despite her best efforts, her injuries and exhaustion finally overcame Uraraka, and she collapsed to the ground. Midnight raised her cat o' nine tails again. Uraraka Ochako is unable to continue. Bakogo Katsuki progresses to the next round. Akatani pointedly did not join in with the applause. Damn, even in front of the entire nation, Bakogu doesn't hold back towards showing off his monstrosity, Kaminari whistled. And that, dear listeners, marks the end of the first round. We will break for a 15-minute intermission to stretch our legs, empty our bladders or butts, and allow for the field to be repaired. But first, the pairings. The giant screens flickered to life with a set of names. Group A, Akatani Makumo vs Todoroki Shudo. Group B, Shiozaki Ibara vs Hatsum Mei. Group C, Ashido Mina vs Tokoyami Fumikage. Group D, Kirishima Ijiru vs Bakugo Katsuki. You're not seeing things wrong, dear listeners. While Mr. TNT was busy blowing away his competition to Kingdom Come, our two hard-headed combatants came around well enough to duel out their tiebreaker and arm wrestling match. And Kirishima from Class 1A1, so he'll be facing Mr. TNT in the second round. But enough with the chit-chat, let's get moving, dear listeners. General chatter rose with the people getting up from their seats and mingling about. Akatani joined the masses, needing to find someplace quiet and isolated to clear his head before his next match. Surely it's nothing, right? It's definitely something. It's coming from our lockers. Then you go see what it is. No way. You should go. You know how terrified I am of rats. Akatani chanced upon an unexpected sight before him. A pair of female students, he didn't recognize them, perhaps they were from the general education department, were standing outside one of the female locker rooms, talking between themselves and glancing inside furtively. May I help you too? The two girls turn in synchronicity towards Akatani. We need to get some things from our lockers, one of them spoke first, but then we discovered several lockers were left open, and we heard noises from inside one of the closed ones. We don't know what's making the noises, the other continued, but it is big enough to rattle the lockers and it seems to be taking short breaths rapidly. It unnerved us so much that we got out. A single conclusion formed itself based on the girl's testimonies in his mind, and it was far from pleasant. By all accounts, it was someone rummaging through the lockers of the female students for purposes one can only describe as nefarious. You two stay here, Akatani told them lowly, eyes beginning to glow. May I have your permission to go inside? The girls nodded, and Akatani stepped into the locker room, fists clenched with jade-colored electricity pulsing up and down his hands. A few moments of silence, then. You disgusting, motherfucking pervert. A high-pitched, squeaky scream, followed by a flash of jade light. The two girls stepped away from the doorway, as more screams, outraged shouts and electricity crackling echoed from within. The din was mixed by the lockers shaking and doors being hit open and slammed by some unknown force, and the sound of something hitting flesh hard. There were some popping noises, followed by the sound of slicing. The two girls looked down. A trail of purple liquid mixed with something crimson was flowing steadily out of the locker room into the corridor. The screams eventually died away, and so did the crackling electricity and flashes of light. The girls watched with widened eyes as a slightly ruffled Akatani emerged from the locker room, shoes stepping on the purple liquid, dragging an unconscious, thoroughly beaten up Mineta Minoru by the ankle. Blood trickled freely from gashes, bruises and scrapes all over the midget's body, especially from his head. There were a few of his sticky balls stuck to his body, most of which had bras or panties stuck fast on them. My apologies for the hold-up, said Akatani. He tried to escape with his loot, so I had to resort to drastic measures. I'm not sure if any of these are your undergarments though. One of the girls quickly shook her head. No. No, it's fine. We know who he is, and we're cool with what we have right now. Great, now if you'll excuse me, Akatani glared at the pervert dangerously. I have a bunch of rotten grapes to dispose of. And welcome back, dear listeners. Present mic open to cheers from the crowd. Right now we are approaching the second round of the battle tournament. We are down to the last 8, and the numbers are only going to whittle down from there. Behind the same set of metal gates, Akatani focused into his core, meditating by letting his electricity run all over his body. He needed all the mental stability he needed to tackle the coming challenge. As the gates rumbled and began to pull apart, he drew his electricity back into his core. Coming out of the east gate is the god of Jade Lightning who pulls no punches even to ignoring the bro code on not kicking a fellow guy in the manly bits, is Akatani Makumo. Releasing a breath, Akatani strode out with a dignified aura to the starting point. Across from him, the other set of metal gates rumbled and began to open. And coming out of the west gate is the Ice King with a heart as frozen as the Arctic Circle, Todoroki Shudo. Akatani regarded his approaching opponent with outward emptiness, face carefully blank. Inside though, his emotions were stirring. He did not forget about that soap opera plot that was all the Todoroki family secrets dumped onto him in that secluded corridor. Todoroki faced him with equal emptiness. But Akatani would be lying to himself if he didn't notice those dichromatic eyes burning with a fierce determination to prove a tyrannical monster masquerading as a father wrong. This wasn't going to be easy, with the match itself and what he hoped he was going to be able to do. I want a clean, fair match. Midnight raised her cat o' nine tails, and, begin. Akatani crackled electricity up his right hand, eyes narrowing as a barrage of ice came racing towards him at breakneck speed. Akatani crackled electricity up his right hand, eyes narrowing as a barrage of ice came racing towards him at breakneck speed. He jumped out of the way, the ice thundering past and slamming into the wall behind him. Rolling to a halt, Akatani was back on his feet in an instant. Leaping out of the way of another pillar of ice, he kick-started his electricity and took to the air. Todoroki did not hesitate. Stepping on the ground, he created and slid up a moving wave of ice straight towards his opponent. Akatani willed his electricity into a supercharged ball and fired it directly at Todoroki. The voltage stung against his chest, throwing him off the ramp. It was only by pulling up a pillar of ice behind that it stopped the dual quirk student from getting a concussion on the ground. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Akatani coalesced the electricity into another ball, this one pulsing all over. He fired it at the frozen wave, which upon contact with the frigid surface, blew apart with such immense force that the ice cracked and splintered apart, sending Todoroki tumbling to the ground. Undeterred, Todoroki slammed his hand on the concrete, a giant spike of ice bursting out and rising straight towards Akatani, who first dodged, then sent a charge of electricity down the spike in return. It managed to hit Todoroki's hand, momentarily paralyzing his arm. The exchange dragged on for several minutes. Todoroki would attempt to catch Akatani off guard with his ice, but the latter will dodge fire electricity back in retaliation, and vice versa. Just like the match between Kirishima and Tetsu, it was quickly becoming a stalemate with no clear advantage for either combatant. What's with this back and forth? Present Mike complained over the sound of battle, we need more action. Akatani thought to himself as he dodged another wall of ice, Todoroki isn't going to let up until the very last moment. I have to try to at least make my intentions a bit more clearer. Swerving around a wave of icicles, Akatani fired 2 flashes of electricity at Todoroki's left side. Both hit, forcing the latter to stop his attack to grab the paralyzed area, pressing some ice onto it to shock off the numbness. Akatani shot another electric ball at him to throw him off. Todoroki grunted against the stinging pain, but showed no change in his demeanor. He continued to use his ice and sweeping, long-range attacks against Akatani, hoping to catch his airborne opponent off guard. Akatani clicked his tongue. It seemed that Todoroki still hadn't gotten the message. Fine, time to switch tactics. Swooping down until he was barely a foot over the field, Akatani shot towards Todoroki. Swerving and dodging around the ice trying to intercept him, he was upon his opponent in seconds. Electricity crackled into a ball in his palm, and just when it seemed that he was about to collide with Todoroki, he swerved upwards, releasing the ball at close quarters on the latter's left side. The sting and numbness was stronger this time. Todoroki hissed, falling to his knees as his left side spasmed. Akatani did a somersault in the air, throwing another flash of electricity that hit the right, making Todoroki crumple to the floor as pain overtook his nerves. The purple-haired teen came to hover in front of his dual-quirk opponent, as he slowly picked himself up from the ground, sensation returning to his body as he rose. Akatani noted that even though Todoroki was able to move now, his right side was quivering. "It's not just my electricity, it's from his ice too." "You're trembling, Todoroki-kun," Akatani stated almost tonelessly. "You're beginning to overuse your ice, pushing your right side closer and closer towards the limit. And when you go over your limit, your body starts to shut down, unable to regulate the constant drops in temperature." Todoroki gritted his teeth. Akatani continued, "You could end up hurting yourself, or worst case, die. Tell me, Todoroki-kun, why do you want to go to such extremes? When such a fate can be avoided by using the heat from your left side?" He could see the flash of anger in his opponent's eyes. He'd hit a nerve, but he had no other choice. "Look around, Todoroki-kun. Everyone are classmates, the other first years, they are all working their arses off to reach their dreams. Everyone has shed blood, sweat, and tears mastering their quirks to the fullest potential just for the chance to become the greatest. And yet, there's you." Electricity crackled over his form, matching his rising emotions. "You fight with only half of your full power, half the effort. Just what are you trying to play at, half-arsing your fight? Thinking that you can win with just your ice? You haven't even been able to stop me with your ice, and you're already faltering." Akatani's eyes began to glow. "I don't know what is going through your thick skull right now, but it is time that you stop fooling around, and come at me with everything you've got." Todoroki's anger tipped over the edge. "I knew it, that old bastard bribed you to his rhetoric, didn't he? You are no different from that monster." He thrust his hand out, shooting out a glacier of ice towards Akatani. However, the speed was much slower than before, brought upon by the first signs of frostbite hampering his movements. Akatani had already long dodged the incoming spire by the time it had reached his previous position. His anger is blinding him. He's not going to let go that easily. "I need to take a more physical approach." Akatani touched down on the ground. Todoroki was charging towards him like an angry bull. The purple-haired teen broke into a run, putting himself in a collision course with his opponent. The distance rapidly shortened, and just when it seemed that they were about to hit, Akatani came to a skidding halt. Making use of his still-moving inertia, he swung the leg out, electricity crackling down the limb. He spun in a roundhouse kick, his boot punching into Todoroki's left side, sending him careening to the right. And Akatani has taken on an offensive stance. Will this give him the edge? Todoroki jumped back up despite the ache in his side. He sent a line of icicles straight towards Akatani, who used his electricity for a second to jump over the rushing ice. Pulling on his core again, Akatani disappeared in a flash of light and electricity, seemingly reforming behind Todoroki to throw him off with another well-aimed kick to his left side. Am I seeing things? Did Akatani just teleport? Growing irritated by the worsening ache, Todoroki released another wave of icicles, which exploded and threw Akatani back a few feet. The purple-haired teen retaliated by blasting a supercharged ball of electricity that, upon contact, made Todoroki fly backwards, coming to a stop only by producing a protective barrier of ice. "Why, are you going to such extremes?" Todoroki grunted as he struggled to stand. Akatani gazed hard at him, electricity dancing over his body. "Because you are being led astray by your foolishness. I already told you, stop half-arsing this battle, and fight me with everything you've got." Todoroki growled, "I already told you, I will never use his power. I will win without his fire." A wave of ice hurtled towards Akatani. He dodged it, firing a wave of electricity that induced paralysis for a few seconds. "Listen to yourself, Todoroki-kun. You are deluding yourself into a fantasy. Do you honestly think you can become the greatest with only half your power? Do you honestly think that you can become a hero with only half the work? Do you honestly think that you can free yourself from your father's shadow just by sheer pettiness? Quite frankly. The purple-haired teen regarded his opponent coldly. I think you're just fucking around, and a complete, utter, joke. For Todoroki, everything suddenly slowed down. His surroundings, the stadium, the spectators, Midnight, present mixed voice, completely vanished as Akatani's words echoed. Then, came the memories. He remembered his training with his father as a kid of age 5, where he was beaten black and blue and forced to the point of nausea. He remembered his mother intervening, begging for mercy, only to get beaten by that bastard himself right in front of his eyes. He remembered being held by his mother, tears flowing liberally down his face, screaming about not wanting to become the monster his father was. He remembered watching his older siblings playing in the courtyard, only to be dragged away by his father for more training. He remembered the fateful day his mother poured boiling water over his left side, and was taken away from him. He remembered screaming at his father for throwing his mother over the edge. Shut up. The air around him turned frigid, the sound of moisture freezing over. Ice began creeping over the ground from his right foot. Shut up. There was a bright flash of light, and the ground shook. Akatani merely closed his eyes as a tsunami of ice raced towards and overwhelmed him in a towering prison of freezing cold. The glacier rivaled the one used to defeat Zero several matches prior, rising and jutting high out of the stadium to the point that news helicopters covering the festival could clearly film it for display throughout the entire country. Todoroki took deep breaths, the adrenaline from his outburst rushing out of him, leaving his body slightly tilted. He lifted his head, gazing upon the colossal glacier in front of him, the climax of several hours of anger, hate and cold-blooded determination to defy the monster watching in the stands. He released an icy breath. You don't know anything. You are just an outsider. You don't know the pain that bastard has done to me and the people I love. You don't know the evil he embodies. You don't know my right to deliver justice for those he destroyed. You know nothing. Todoroki crumbled to one knee on the ground, energy spent. The entire stadium was silent, everyone waiting in tension for what was to happen next. Akatani fucked up, didn't he? Jairu remarked. I don't understand what he was doing. Yaoyorozu crossed her arms. He could have easily thrown Todoroki out of bounds, but he went and riled his opponent up. What is he trying to achieve? Kaminari stared at the glacier encasing his friend. He has a plan. Both girls turned to the blonde. I don't know what he is planning. But something big is gonna come from this. How do you know? Jairu asked with a raised eyebrow. It's Akatani. Kaminari turned to his classmate. Everything he does, there's always a reason. And this is no different. Like I said, I don't know exactly what he is planning, but I think we're about to find out. Both Jairu and Yaoyorozu stare at the blonde for another moment, before turning their attention back to the field. Midnight stepped down from the dais, and walked over to the glacier. So colossal, so thick it was, that she couldn't even see Akatani inside at all. Not even a silhouette or a shadow could be discerned from the refracting light in the sheer blue of the ice. She raised her cat o'9 tails. Akatani Makumo is dash. Crack. The loud sound reverberated across the silent stadium, cutting Midnight off. A large fissure had fractured the ice, racing deep into the core. This was followed by another, and then another, and another. Midnight wisely backed away and hurried back up the dais. Todoroki shakily stood back up. The ground began to shake, as more cracks began tearing the glacier apart. The roar of ice splintering was almost deafening, made more so by the sound of electricity crackling wildly, long arcs dancing over the crumbling glacier. There were loud crashes as pieces of ice broke off from the main structure and collapsed to the ground, kicking up dust and flurries of snow. Beams of jade light was shooting out of the fissures in all directions, growing brighter and brighter. Until, in one split second, the glacier exploded. Once again, a blinding light enveloped the stadium, forcing everyone to duck away and shield their eyes. It took several seconds for the light to dim enough for anyone to see properly without permanently destroying their retinas. The air was glistening with tiny ice crystals that seemed to suspend for a moment, before raining down onto the field and the rest of the stadium in a beautiful shower. Amidst the downpour, stood a figure completely surrounded by crackling bolts of electricity. His exposed skin was flushed from the frigid temperature, each breath he took coming out as a condensed cloud of mist. His Lichtenberg scars glowed with an unearthly jade. The figure slowly raised his head to line with his opponent. His eyelids lifted, exposing glowing jade irises that were aflame with pulsing energy. "You're right, Todoroki-kun, I don't know anything." Holy shit. Akatani just destroyed a glacier like it was nothing. Can literally anything stop him? The purple-haired teen took a step forward, his footstep crackling with electricity. "I don't know your circumstances. How can I? I am not you." Another step forward. The dual-quirk combatant made no move to attack. "I don't know what you went through. I don't know what the pain of being abused, beaten down, and crushed by the one who was supposed to care and love you must feel like. I don't know your desire to right the wrong committed against you and your loved ones for over a decade. There is no way I can fully begin to comprehend the hell you went through to arrive at this point." Akatani came to a stop. Todoroki released another icy breath. His opponent looked so ethereal now, like a being not from this mortal world. His expression and tone was still the same blank coolness, but his eyes were burning with a fire that bore something he didn't dare believe existed in anyone who was aware of his tragic past. Understanding. Suddenly, it was as if everything around them didn't matter. The stadium, the spectators, midnight, was all gone. It was only him and Akatani. "I don't know a lot of things about you, Todoroki-kun," the purple-haired teen continued, "but if anything, there is one thing I know about you that is undeniable." Akatani stretched out a hand, pointing at his opponent's left side. "That fire that you so vehemently rebel against, that which you associate with that monster who has destroyed everything that you loved, that you see as a symbol of evil that needs to be fought and vanquished, is not anyone's to own. It is yours, Todoroki-kun." The bicolored-haired teen flinched, breath hitching. "The fire doesn't belong to your father. It belongs to you, and only you. It is your power, Todoroki-kun," Akatani continued. "You may have inherited it from that monster, but it is ultimately yours to wield." His pointed finger slowly turned into an outstretched hand. Todoroki's heart began to ache. A single memory, buried so deep under years of pain and agony, began to resurface and play before his eyes. It was a quiet moment, spent between him and his mother while his father was away on hero duties. They were watching the news broadcast of All Might saving civilians from a villain attack. He remembered being transfixed to the screen, watching in awe as the #1 hero pulled survivors out of the rubble, declaring his famous catchphrase, "I am here," to the camera. His mother was by his side, idly running her fingers through his dual-color hair. "You see that?" He remembered her asking him, "You want to be a hero like All Might too, huh?" "Michem," the younger him nodded, not taking his eyes off the screen. "I want to become like All Might when I grow up." He remembered the warmth in his mother's voice, her words eerily echoing what Akatani was telling him in the present. "You are not a prisoner of your own blood, Shuto/Todoroki-kun. You decide what you want to become." His breath hitched, emotions rising as tears began to trickle from his eyes. Little wisps of steam began seeping from the left side of his face, growing bigger and faster as the flow of tears rose into a flood. Sparks and embers joined the steam, his emotions rupturing and bursting forth in an explosion of liberation. And with one loud cry, fire erupted from his left side, rapidly expanding into a conflagration of apocalyptic proportions. Akatani retracted his outstretched hand to shield his eyes from the blistering light burning in front of him. The heat was intense, melting away any trace of ice that remained in an instant. Akatani could literally see the air around them become visible, pulsating wildly. Sweat was already beginning to trickle down his brows. But he didn't regret it, not for a second. He had achieved what he had striven to do the moment he stepped out into the field God knows how long ago. He had bulldozed through the walls Todoroki has built around himself, and dragged him out into the light. He felt a wave of satisfaction flow through his nerves. And for the first time in a very long time, he let a small smile grace his lips. Opposite him, Todoroki finally came into view amidst the roaring flames. His face was scrunched up with emotion, tears falling from his eyes but evaporating almost instantly by the soaring temperatures before they could drop far. "Why, are you going so far?" he breathed out. Akatani's smile did not abate. Under the jaded coldness lies a child whose innocence prevails despite the hardships he has gone through. That child wants to become a hero, someone who saves others and puts a smile on everyone's faces. I am merely pulling that child out towards his dream, unhindered by the monsters holding him captive. Shakily, a smile etched itself over Todoroki's lips. "You're insane, you know that?" "You're not the first to tell me that," Akatani shrugged, "but that's what a true hero does, to do the insane and reckless to save others." Todoroki closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Akatani could see the growing ferality in those dichromatic irises. "You do know that electricity may be useless against fire? You might just lose." "I know," Akatani nodded, "but saving you was far more worth it than any victory." The purple-haired teen's eyes began glowing brightly, electricity coursing wildly over his form. "Now, like I said before and I'll say it again, come at me with everything you've got." Todoroki's smile grew wider. "Akatani, thank you." Hellish fire rushed towards the crackling electricity. "Woo! That's it, my man. Bring out the fire." Kaminari whooped. The rest of 1A were staring at the scene in shock. So Akatani was trying to get Todoroki to embrace his other side, Jairu realized. "What a noble thing to do," Yaoyorozu added. Jairu turned to the right, and Kaminari isn't the only one excited about this. Several of her classmates followed her line of sight. Some distance away, Endeavor appeared to be losing his shite, in a good way it seemed. His facial fire was roaring wildly, and he was gripping the railing so strongly it seemed that he was going to tear it off the floor. "Shaoto! You finally accepted yourself. With my power you will surpass them all. You will finally achieve my greatest goal." Those watching him sweat dropped. What's he going on about? Jairu wondered. Who knows? Yaoyorozu muttered. Back on the field, it was no holds barred. Akatani conjured an electric dome shield over himself to counter the incoming firm storm. As it roared past, the intense heat made the shield flicker, forcing Akatani to add more electricity to keep it whole. Finally, the fire stopped, allowing him to drop the shield. Not bad, Todoroki conceded, you are able to hold your own. But the question is, how much are you able to take on before you are defeated? Akatani smirked, let's test that out, shall we? Todoroki outstretched his hand. A blast of fire raced for Akatani, who retaliated with a beam of electricity. Both collided, canceling the other out. Akatani then dashed towards his opponent, firing electric bolts at both sides to throw him off balance. Todoroki countered it with a pillar of ice and blast of fire. Immediately, the disparity between his two sides became apparent, the ice managing to block the first bolt, but the fire missed the second bolt and it struck Todoroki, paralyzing him momentarily. Akatani used the same pillar of ice to kick himself off the ground. Temporarily airborne, he pulled on his core, and disappeared in a cloud of electricity. He then reformed behind a still reeling Todoroki, blasting him forwards with a beam of electricity. Tumbling and rolling several feet, the dual quirk student picked himself, and faced his opponent again. Enough, time to end this. You're making me work, I'll give you that, Todoroki conceded, but I think we've played enough, prepare to lose. Akatani touched down, bring it. Todoroki slammed his right boot down, ice sprouted up with enough force to shake the ground. It continued to rise towards the heavens, before arching over him like a tidal wave. Akatani meanwhile kick-started his electric flight, hovering several feet in the air. He outstretched his hands up, and through sheer will, began to draw electricity from the stadium and static from the atmosphere. The sky and clouds began to distort, and across the stadium, light fixtures exploded. The exposed wiring had the electricity drained, hurtling towards Akatani in crackling bolts. What are they doing? Present Mike could be heard over the din, his voice distorted by the microphone circuits fluctuating. Akatani lowered his outstretched hands, letting the electricity channel into his core. A translucent sphere of light began to expand from within his torso, growing out until it completely enveloped him and continuing out by several feet. After it reached a sufficient circumference, Akatani dived towards the ground, plateauing at a height of a meter, and hurtled straight towards Todoroki. Todoroki continued growing the ice, as he raised his left hand, the first embers of fire igniting from his palm. Akatani continued to speed towards his opponent. He curled his hands together, creating a supercharged ball of electricity. He channeled the electrical energy into the ball, which began to pulse and vibrate. The more energy went in, the more unstable it became. The fire in Todoroki's palm burst into life. Akatani, now halfway across the field, continued to channel more energy into the ball, which appeared to become alive and danced around his hands. The distance closed, foot by foot. Todoroki was coming into close view already. Just a little more. His jade irises flashed over. Back at the stands, Kaminari blanched. "Oh fuck. Get down." Akatani unleashed the energy in the ball at once, which exploded and hurtled forwards in a blinding beam of light and electricity. At the same time, Todoroki's fire erupted into a conflagration, which flash ignited the frigid air around him from the ice. A hurricane of wind collided with the beam head-on. There was a split second of silence. Then, boom! Like the largest man-made nuclear bomb going off, a massive explosion shook the entire stadium down to the foundations. A mushroom cloud of dust erupted into the air, just as a shockwave of typhoon proportions raced outwards at the speed of a tsunami in all directions. Those who heard Kaminari's warning and ducked down with him were pushed back against the concrete steps, but otherwise protected, while those who hadn't were thrown out of the seats and sent flying backwards as the rush of wind carried them off. Midnight was flung off the dais. Endeavor gripped the railing so hard against the roaring wind that it broke off under the strain, sending him tumbling backwards. Up in the commentator's box, Aizawa and Present Mike dropped to the floor as the shockwave shattered the windows in a shower of glass. In a matter of seconds, it was over, and the dust began to fall. All across the stadium, people were groaning and coughing, picking themselves up and disentangling from one another as the dust shrouded everything. No one could see more than a few feet ahead, so confusion began setting in almost immediately. Kaminari and the rest of One joined the masses in rising to their feet, stunned by the sudden climatic escalation. What just happened? Uraraka could be heard over the chorus of voices. Fuck, that was intense. Kirishima awed. Kaminari hurried to the railing, leaning over to look for any sign of Akatani. But with the dust still lingering, the fate of Akatani and Todoroki still remained a mystery. Up in the commentator's box, Present Mike quickly helped Aizawa to his feet. After a frantic checkover that made the mummified teacher threaten to cancel his quirk, the loud-voiced hero returned to the microphone. Well, despite our dear listener's unintentional attempt to demolish the stadium, we all managed to survive, I think. He glanced about the shrouded field furtively. Does anyone know what happened to them? No one knew, even when the dust began to settle and visibility started to return. Midnight pushed herself up from the ground and limped back onto the dais, which now sported visible cracks. For several moments, no one quite knew what to do. Until, in the thinning dust, movement was spotted. Ah! Could it be? As the dust continued to settle, flashes of jade light permeated through. A dome of crackling electricity eventually came into view, and at Akatani, boots dug into the ground behind a short trench from being pushed back by the initial explosion. He cancelled the electricity, and crumpled to his knees, exhausted and panting hard, but otherwise uninjured save for a few scrapes. The floor of the ring had come into view, cracked and full of debris. Eyes gazed at him in wonder, before sweeping over to the other side of the field. Todoroki had been thrown off and slammed against the metal doors that he had come out from, a fan of ice cushioning the blow and keeping him upright. Despite that, he was unconscious, head slumped forward. For midnight, back on the dais after the explosion had died down, the results were clear. Todoroki Shuto is out of bounds. Akatani Makumo advances to the next round. Amidst the applause and cheers from Kaminari, Akatani sighed in relief. Standing back up, he rose off the cracked and fissured ground, and rather sluggishly flew across the field. Touching down to the ground outside the ring, he sauntered over to his unconscious opponent. Gingerly stepping over the ice, he gently lifted Todoroki up into a bridal carry, kick-starting his electricity again. Akatani flew back across the field, directly towards the metal doors that he had emerged from earlier. And to end this mind-blowing match, is a show of sportsmanship that truly cements Akatani as a shining example of what a hero course student should be, President Mike said as the purple-haired teen disappeared into the darkness. Once inside the bowels of the stadium, Akatani came to a land on the floor. Despite feeling distinctly off-kilter, he managed a brisk walk towards the temporary infirmary. With one hand holding Todoroki up, he used the other to knock on the door, before letting himself in. The moment he was inside, he was greeted by an extremely exasperated recovery girl. "You just had to dive headfirst into insanity, didn't you, Akatani? You couldn't have done things the normal way?" The teen shrugged. "You're the third person to tell me that, but I don't regret it." The youthful heroine sighed loudly. "Just put him on the bed, and let me check you over as well. Don't think I didn't see how haphazard your flying was when you carried him." Akatani grunted. He stepped over to an empty bed, and gently laid Todoroki down on it. He then approached Recovery Girl, and sat down on the stool in front of her. She planted a kiss on his forehead, and as the effects of her quirk began to settle, he felt rather drowsy from the drain in energy. From a container, Recovery Girl fished out half a dozen gummies, and dropped them into Akatani's palm. "Eat them," she told him simply, "you'll need whatever energy for your next match." "Thanks, Recovery Girl. I think I won't disturb you now." "Yes," the elderly hero sighed, "my head is all white now, if anything it will start regaining color again." Akatani almost chuckled at that. The only thing stopping him was knowing that he was the cause for that statement. He threw the gummies into his mouth, chewed and swallowed them at one go. He felt some energy return to his body, but he still felt sluggish overall. Perhaps draining electricity from the stadium will do him good. Bidding Recovery Girl farewell, Akatani departed from the infirmary. Trudging through the hallways, he returned to his class locker room. Going to his locker, he opened it, and rummaged through his belongings for a bit. Pulling out an electric plug and a USB cable, he closed his locker and headed for the exit, mindful to step over the trail of purple liquid mixed with crimson that was leaking from a lower locker and spreading all over the floor. Now where can I find an outlet? Akatani had been traversing the corridors for a while now, and so far he had yet to find a single power outlet that he could exploit to recharge his electric reserves. It was kind of frustrating, since the stadium was a huge building, and a building should have power outlets lying around. He wondered if the author was just messing with him, or if they were somehow preparing him for another event that had a significant impact to the story he was currently in. Akatani turned round a corner, only to come face to chest with the number 2 hero, Endeavor. Yeah, he would really like to curse the author for jinxing him, for the nth time. "Yes? What can I do for you, Endeavor?" The flame hero started. "What, did you just call me? Isn't that your name? Endeavor? What's the matter with me calling you by something so fundamental?" Akatani raised an eyebrow. The facial fire seemed to explode. "Listen, boy. You may think you're quite clever, but I demand respect. "I know I'm clever," Akatani interrupted. "That's why I know you don't deserve a single ounce of respect from me, you flaming piece of rotten sewage." Endeavor looked ready to incinerate the smaller teen to ashes, but he visibly steeled himself, releasing one loud breath. "Anyway, I've been looking for you." "That doesn't sound reassuring." Akatani crossed his arms, "and for the record, I am not into older, married men." Endeavor spluttered, before composing himself. "Shuto is supposed to be my ultimate creation, to one day rise to the top and overthrow All Might. He Todoroki-kun already told me that, Akatani interrupted again, and honestly? I find it disgusting, living out your fantasies through your own child. Endeavor growled, continuing nonetheless, Shuto is supposed to be the ultimate weapon, but you disgraced him out in the field in front of the entire country. You dash. On the contrary, I didn't disgrace Todoroki-kun, Akatani refuted, I saved him, from you. That silenced the number 2 hero, allowing the teen to continue his scathing diatribe. Already your very appearance strikes terror in just about anyone unfortunate enough to cross paths with you, and by that I mean innocent bystanders. And that is before I go into your abhorrent attitude and personality that makes me wonder how you even got your license. Furthermore, I know every single skeleton hiding in your closet, courtesy of Todoroki-kun. How you abused your children and your wife, destroyed their lives, all for the sake of your fucked up pride over a fucking title. As far as I know, you are no hero. You are the epitome. Akatani's eyes flashed, of what a villain is. Endeavor's facial fire exploded, you insolent brat dash. The teen's lightning-quick reflexes caught the fist before it could destroy his jaw, though that was also partly due to the older man's surprise. Somehow, I'm not surprised that you resorted to violence, even against a student who was merely speaking the truth. Speaks wonders about your lack of restraint. Akatani discharged some electricity into his hand, forcing Endeavor to pull his fist back from the paralyzing shock. It is individuals like you that tarnish the title of hero. You think that just because you have a powerful quirk, everything must bend to your will, irregardless of the innocent lives you destroyed in your wake. But you take advantage of society's selective blindness towards heroes and flashy quirks to hide your sins, and present a false image to the unsuspecting. I could go on and on about my thoughts about individuals like you, but frankly I'd be wasting my breath. But what I can say is, you cannot hide from karma, Endeavor. Your sins will come back for payment, and only heaven knows how much they will demand from you. I just want you to be aware, because unlike you, I actually have a moral compass. Akatani didn't bother with a parting bow, just pushing past the silent hero to continue his search for a power outlet. He stopped when Endeavor's voice reached his ears. What do you know? The tone was certainly mocking and full of arrogance. You're just a heroics student. Akatani outwardly did not react, but something ruptured deep inside his cold, frozen heart. A darkness, full of vengeance and malice, spread in a miasmic cloud over his core and soul. He turned his back to gaze at the number 2 hero, jade irises glowing and electric bolts crackling out from the pools of warning. I may be just a student, but I'd still suggest you watch your back, Endeavor. Karma likes to bide its time for the best moment before it strikes. With that, Akatani turned away, and continued down the hallway, leaving behind a silent Endeavor in his wake. I swear to everything that is holy, if I can't find a power outlet in the next minute, I will short-circuit every single light fixture I encounter until I find one. If Akatani wanted to exaggerate, he'd say that he had already covered half the stadium, and he still had yet to find a single outlet. And with his confrontation with Endeavor using up more of his remaining energy, that threat to cause collateral damage was becoming increasingly likely. But the author decided to be merciful to their protagonist. Just as Akatani turned a corner and entered another inconspicuous corridor, his eyes zeroed in on a single power outlet, rather dusty from lack of use, but just what he needed. Fucking finally. Sitting himself down beside the outlet, Akatani pushed in the plug and attached the wire. Sticking the other end into his mouth, he flipped the switch, and began draining the electricity from the wiring. The corridor lights flickered, slowly at first but quickly gained speed as the circuit was disrupted. Akatani felt himself slowly become more energized, but he had to admit that it was a bit on the slow side, not like the quicker bursts from a power bank. He didn't know how much time he had until his next match, but he needed all the electricity he can hold, and more, to get through the next rounds. There you are. Akatani looked up down the corridor. Kaminari ran up to him, out of breath. He released the USB cable from his mouth. Oh, hey. Don't you oh hey me. Kaminari cried between breaths, I've been looking for you left, right and center. In fact, the only reason I managed to locate you at all was by following the corridors that were in blackout or had their lights flickering madly. Akatani blinked, sorry. Damn right you should be. Kaminari huffed, sitting down next to his friend, but anyway, enough from me. You were absolutely fucking amazing down there, and that ending. A bit overkill, but still mind-blowing. Akatani shrugged, helping Todoroki-kun was my main objective, victory was secondary. And I'm really proud of you, you know that? Kaminari smiled, bumping shoulders with the purple-haired teen, you were a true hero out there. Thanks Kaminari. The blonde beamed, and the two friends lulled into a comfortable silence for a few moments. Akatani had put the wire back into his mouth and began draining the electricity again. The corridor lights began flickering wildly again. So, recharging for your next match? Yep, Akatani nodded, releasing the cable. Did I really send some areas of the stadium into blackout? Yeah, you did, Kaminari nodded. To be honest, I thought I was in a horror movie when going through those parts. The flickering lights and being all alone didn't help matters. Akatani hummed, putting the cable back into his mouth. His arm snaked across his blonde friend's shoulders and pulled him close. Kaminari eeped at the sudden move at intimacy, but found himself unwilling to complain. They sat in silence amidst the flickering lights until there was a popping sound, and the corridor plunged into darkness. Akatani released the cable. The electricity stopped flowing. Well, you did send this corridor into blackout, Kaminari replied. I think you disrupted the circuit. His friend sighed, great, now I have to find another outlet. Had trouble finding this one? Yes, I think the world is just really out to get me right now. Somewhere, the author snickered. Kaminari fell into thought. Something occurred to him. Thank goodness for the low visibility, for he wasn't sure if he wanted Akatani to see the blush rapidly spreading across his cheeks. He felt his stomach twinge with nervousness. But then again, he was in love with the purple-haired Ice King. And he wouldn't shy away from any chance of having consensual physical contact if it was given to him. So, maybe? Hey Akatani? I think I can help, Kaminari powered through inwardly, not letting his nerves stop him. I might be able to transfer my electricity to you. But I need physical contact to get it to work. Akatani blinked, sure, but it feels wrong to exploit your electricity. And how's that different from exploiting the electricity from the stadium? Kaminari retorted with a smug look. Well, I care for you deeply. I don't have feelings for a building. And there goes the Cupid's arrow through the blonde's heart. Taking a few moments to will the love-struck HNGHHHH look off from his face, Kaminari released a breath and cleared his throat. He had to keep it together. So anyway, here goes. Kaminari reached out and cupped his friend's cheek. He then channeled his electricity into his palm, phasing it through Akatani's skin. The dark corridor was illuminated dimly by the yellow glow. Is it working? Akatani replied, I can feel it entering my body, but it's kinda slow, actually more so than using a USB cable. Kaminari furrowed his brows, trying to come up with any possible alternatives. Actually, I think there's a better way, Akatani quipped, but please tell me if you're uncomfortable with it. Oh? The purple-haired teen took his friend's crackling hand and guided it over his lips. Kaminari's fading blush reignited the moment the lips kissed his palm. His heart began to thunder as Akatani pulled away, hovered over his palm to different spots, breath fanning over the skin before pressing his open lips down again. Kaminari faintly felt his electricity being absorbed, the sensation dulled by his mind racing from the initiation of such soft intimacy. He unintentionally lost control of his electricity, but instead of frying his brain as it normally would, it shot out of his palm into Akatani's lips. The glow enveloping the two friends grew brighter until it illuminated the corridor. The crackling grew louder, to the point it completely blotted out any other sound from the surroundings. But despite that, the blonde was able to hear his friend amidst the din. I think I've reached full capacity. Thank you, Kaminari, your dash. Whatever he wanted to say after that, however, was interrupted by flashes of jade electricity. They sat there, unable to move, as jade and yellow intermingled into a blinding light that pulsated erratically. The corridor started to tremble, getting progressively stronger as if an earthquake was rolling through. Then, there was a loud noise, and the light seemed to explode into a burst of electricity, throwing the two friends back away from the other slightly. The tremors subsided, and the darkness slowly returned as the light faded. Despite the blowback, Kaminari quickly recovered. He stumbled over to Akatani. "Oh my god, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" The purple-haired teen slowly sat up, wincing slightly. "I don't think so." The blonde helped his friend to his feet. "Akatani, what the hell was that?" "I think our electricity came into contact with one another, causing a buildup of energy that exploded." "Can electricity do that?" "I've seen my electricity do a lot of things," Akatani surmised, "but mixing with someone else's electricity and reacting violently? That's something I can honestly say I've never experienced before." The question was ultimately left unanswered, but that didn't stop the two friends from discussing it as they departed the corridor, with Akatani hurrying back to retrieve the plug and USB cable a few paces out. Back in the Class 1A stands, Akatani and Kaminari reclaimed their seats. "Where were you two?" Jairu asked with a raised eyebrow. "Recharging," Akatani replied. "So what did we miss?" "Ashido-san and Tokoyami-san's match. Tokoyami-san won, Yaoyorozu supplied, but Kogu-san and Kirishima-san are having their battle now." Akatani turned to the field. Bakugo was going all out with his explosions, while Kirishima was holding his own with his hardening quirk, withstanding the bursts of fire and noise, and getting through a few punches that threw the blonde off. Like the redhead's previous match with Tetsu, it had stagnated into a stalemate. "What's with the dancing around each other again?" Present Mike could be heard complaining. "Haven't we had enough of that already? Where's the strategy and action? The trump card? Anything?" Akatani's line of sight zeroed in on Bakugo. His sharp eye and discerning mind deduced that that was what the explosive Pomeranian was trying to do: pick out a weakness in his opponent's defense and exploit it until he emerged victorious. Bakugo released an explosion at close range, but again, it was blocked by Kirishima's hardening. Dodging a kick, the explosive blonde quickly let rip another explosion, leaving his opponent no time to dive out of the way. Kirishima was thrown backwards, his hand flying to his side, which was turning slightly crimson. That was it. The trump card Bakugo needed. Screaming bloody murder, the explosive blonde threw one explosion after the other at Kirishima. The redhead was able to block the first one, but the subsequent bursts of fire, the shockwaves and the intense heat forced him to drop the hardening. After which, there was nothing protecting from being thrown about like a ragdoll, flung up into the air, hitting the ground. Blood began to seep from scrapes and cuts from the violence, but it was one well-aimed explosion to head that brought the axe down on Kirishima's efforts to keep standing against the onslaught. By the time the noise faded and the dust settled, Kirishima was on the ground, unconscious, and bleeding heavily. Bakugo didn't look any worse for the wear, but his hands were visibly trembling. Kirishima Ijiru is unable to continue. Bakugo Katsuki progresses to the next round. Stilted applause followed. Bakugo huffed dismissively, turning on his heel and stomping out of the field, leaving his opponent to be picked up by the Medibots. Akatani sighed, shaking his head slightly. Bakugo still has no qualms against going overboard, isn't he? Kaminari remarked. No words could describe how much Akatani assented to that statement. Just as always, dear listeners, Bakugo-kun pulls all the stops with relentless fury. With a bit of luck, he might just emerge as the winner of this year's sports festival. Over my dead body, Akatani scowled. But that remains to be seen. We still have a few more matches to go. And on that note, let's meet the final two combatants for this round. The spectators roared in anticipation as the first set of metal doors opened. Coming out of the East Gate is the incarnation of the Lord Jesus Christ, and symbol of pureness, Shiozaki Ibra of Class 1B. Impervious to the cheers around her, the vine-headed girl entered the light of the ring with dignity, hands clasped together in prayer. Across the field from her, the other set of metal doors opened. And coming out of the west gate is the only support student to make it this far. Inventor extraordinaire, Hatsum May. The cheers were noticeably louder as the pink-haired girl skipped up to the ring, waving to the spectators and soaking up the attention. She was carrying 2 large cylinders over her shoulders, attached to a nozzle. Immediately, Akatani knew what was about to happen. Hatsum-san is going to win this match, he declared. How do you know? Jairu asked. The invention she's got, he replied. I wonder if Shiozaki-san's afraid of fire. Jairu took a moment to realize what her classmate was saying. Match start. Shiozaki made the first move by shooting her vine straight towards Hatsum. The inventor whirred her boots to life, leaping into the air, the vines racing beneath her. While still airborne, she brandished the nozzle, her eyes gleaming with manic glee. Time to light it up. She flexed the trigger. There was a loud whoosh, and a stream of fire blasted out of the nozzle straight onto the vines. The plant matter ignited instantly, the fire racing up towards Shiozaki herself. Shiozaki screamed, shedding the burning vines before the fire could get too close. Hatsum landed back on the ground amidst the conflagration, a challenging grin spreading her lips. So, what's it going to be? For Shiozaki, seeing the nozzle aimed at her was more than enough to come up with an answer. I surrender. I admit defeat. Hatsum smirked, turning towards the audience. I like to go back into history for inspiration, just so you know. With this enhanced flamethrower capable of reaching a range of 30 meters with half the fuel consumption as the original in World War II, improved by yours truly, defense and attack will be in the bag right from the get-go. Shiozaki Ibara has surrendered. Hatsum May proceeds to the next round. Once again, the technical might of the pink-haired inventor had triumphed over quirks. Akatani let the corners of his lips turn up a little bit. As service robots rushed into the field to extinguish the fire and clear away the charred vines, President Mick's voice filled the air again, and that concludes this round, dear listeners. Just goes to show that quirks aren't the only things that make a hero. While we get the field ready, we're going to have a 15-minute intermission to let everyone stretch their legs. Oh, and turn your attention to the screens to see the listings for the 4 remaining contenders. Semi-final Group A, Akatani Mikumo vs Tokoyami Fumikage. Semi-final Group B, Bakugo Katsuki vs Hatsum May. I better get going, Akatani stood up from his seat. All the best. Kaminari cheered, wipe the floor with bird arse. I will. Making his way down to his designated holding area, Akatani encountered Hatsum going in the opposite direction to where he was going. Oh Hatsum-san, congrats on your win. Are you preparing for your next match? Thanks, Mr. 10 million points, the inventor huffed with pride. Actually, I'm going to speak to Midnight Sensei. Why? I decided to withdraw from my match with Mr. Explodopants. Akatani raised an eyebrow. What brought this up? Do you see how powerful those explosions are? Hatsum stared at him as if he was stupid. My babies won't last 1 second exposed to such destructiveness. That is something I am not willing to put my hard work through, to see them reduced to shrapnel before I get blasted to the heavens. Akatani fell into thought. You make a good point, but I don't think you should just throw in the towel just yet. Oh? And what do you propose, oh great wise one? Hatsum asked, and I don't mean in a sarcastic way. Your wisdom has worked before. The purple-haired teen hummed, I think you should still go see Kayama-sensei, but explain that while you want to continue on with the battle, you have reservations about being able to hold out against Bakugo's explosions. Then, you request to admit defeat, and later battle Tokoyami for the second runner-up placing. And how do you know this is going to work? I cannot be completely certain, but given your word about Bakugo and how my electricity can generate light, Tokoyami will most likely be your opponent, regardless of whether you battle against the explosive Pomeranian or not. Kayama-sensei probably won't refuse either, since there will be a second runner-up match anyway. My only suggestion is that you pick out a tool or equipment that can generate blinding light for your match against Tokoyami. Hatsum tapped a finger against her chin. I might be able to pull something out. Yeah, this could work. I think we've got ourselves another deal here, Mr. 10 million points. Excellent, Akatani nodded. Well, I better be off. The intermission's almost over. Best of luck. Thanks. The two went their separate ways. A few paces in, Hatsum realized something. She quickly turned around. Hey, Mr. 10 million points. How's the plan to snag yourself a boyfriend coming along? Akatani's eyes glimmered. It will happen soon, when I am standing on the podium. I can't wait to witness that. Oh, and I get dibs on being your boyfriend's inventor as well. I'll let him be the final say on that. Akatani gave Hatsum a two-finger salute, and went on his way. Hey dear listeners. We are back. Give me your loudest cheer. A deafening roar threatened to blow the roof off. And we are down to our last 4 contestants. We're approaching the climax that everyone is waiting on the edge of their seats for quite a while now. Let's hope it comes with a huge bang. Another echo of cheers. But before we proceed with the next battle, there has been a change in plans, as I was told. Everyone, turn your attention to the screens. The giant screens flickered to life, playing a video feed of Hatsum in conversation with Midnight. The inventor was following Akatani's advice, explaining her reservations about facing Bakugo. You see, Kayama-sensei, I'm always ready to go all out with guns blazing. But I pick my battles, I fight smart. I know when the outcome is worth the effort. And knowing the explosive Pomeranian, it's not worth it. He will stop at nothing until I am a bloody pulp on the ground and my precious babies are just bits of metal and scrap. I know there will be a match to determine the third placer, and honestly, I'm willing to forego the minuscule chance of emerging the winner of this sports festival if the safety of myself and my babies are guaranteed. So please, Kayama-sensei, allow me to withdraw from my spot and fight for third place instead. Hatsum finished her plea with a bow. Midnight considered the unexpected request, but ultimately, she didn't take long to come to a decision. You're not wrong to feel unsafe. I've seen Bakugo's fights, and I feel distinctly uncomfortable with just how unrestrained and excessively violent he was. Very well, I'll let you withdraw from your battle with Bakugo. You will go up against the winner of Akatani and Tokoyami's match. Thank you so much, Kayama-sensei. As thanks, I'll remake your props into usable weapons for practical application. The R-18 heroine hummed. I think we can work something out, the older woman nodded. I'll be in touch with you, Hatsum-chan. The inventor had stars in her eyes. I won't let you down, Kayama-sensei. The video feed cut. Oh boy, I can't imagine what they're going to come up with. Then don't, Aizawa interjected. Furthermore, there are children watching. Get on with the battle, before parents start suing us for corrupting their innocent dearest's minds. Right you are, Shoyuta. So on that note, let's meet the players. The metal doors on one side rumbled open. Coming out of East Gate is the Lord of Darkness, philosopher of edginess and feather games so sharp you'll get cuts, Tokoyami Fumikage. On the other side, the metal doors also rumbled open. And facing off this literal bird boi is the god of Jade Lightning, so powerful that not even the elements of the earth can stop him, Akatani Makumo. Tokoyami regarded his opponent with calm dignity. We were allies before, but now we face off as enemies. Akatani replied, face neutral, circumstances merely led things to what they are now. I know, the bird-headed student nodded. I just hope you don't hold this against me. Likewise. Midnight raised her cat o' nine tails. I want a fair match. And, begin. Tokoyami hurtled forward, dark shadow. Go on the offensive. The sentient quirk screeched, bursting out of Tokoyami and rushing towards its master's opponent, claws out ready to strike. Akatani's eyes gleamed. He reached into his core, and pulled violently. A blinding light not unlike the first one during his match against Shinso exploded across the stadium. Dark Shadow shrieked in agony against the searing aurora, retracting back into its master to hide. Tokoyami himself skidded to halt to shield his eyes from being burned away. It was a distraction that proved his downfall. Akatani reformed back into his body, and while his opponent was still reeling, flew across the field, electricity pooling into a ball in his hands. At the right size and volatility, Akatani fired the ball straight at Tokoyami, who had no chance of dodging it. Punching right into his stomach, the ball continued its movement, sending Tokoyami flying out of the ring. Akatani cancelled his electricity, coming to a landing. Tokoyami Fumikage is out of bounds. He will participate in the third-placer match. Akatani Makumo progresses to the final round. Amidst the applause, Akatani rushed off the field towards his classmate. "Are you all right?" He held out a hand. Tokoyami took the offered help. "I'm fine, just a little sore and scraped up." Akatani pulled his classmate to his feet. "You beat me fair and square, Akatani," Tokoyami spoke up. "I was at a disadvantage." "This doesn't mean anything in the long run, Tokoyami," the purple-haired teen interjected. "You're going to reach amazing heights." That brought a small grin to the bird-headed student's beak, as would you. "Good luck with your match against Bakugo, it's going to become one huge banquet of madness." "Thank you all the same." Midnight strolled up to the two classmates. "Everything okay? No hard feelings?" "Yes, Kayama-sensei," they replied together. "Splendid," the R18 heroine smiled. "And how are you feeling now, Tokoyami-kun?" "None the worse for wear," he shrugged. "That's great to hear," Midnight nodded. "It's been decided that the next match will be for third place. Yamada wants to save the final match to the end to, quote, build up the suspense." She made finger quotes here. "I think it's just dramatics, but you're up for another match." "I understand, Kayama-sensei," Tokoyami nodded. "What do I do then?" Akatani asked. "You'll join me on the dais until the match is over," Midnight instructed. "Yes, Kayama-sensei." "All right then," the older woman clapped her hands together. "I think we're all set. Take it away, Yamada." "Thanks, Kayama." So without further ado, let's bring out Hatsune from the support course. The doors that Akatani had come out from opened again. The pink-haired inventor stepped out into the light, once again soaking up the cheers and attention with glee. Tokoyami took his place opposite her, and Akatani followed Midnight up onto the dais. The purple-haired teen spotted the augmented pot shotgun Hatsune used to take Ida out in a holster by her waist, and in her hand, something that looked like an old camera flashbulb from the 20th century. He could already picture how this match will turn out. "So, Mr. Edgelord, I hope you're ready to face my babies." Tokoyami turned to Akatani. "Edgelord?" "She gives nicknames to everyone," he replied back. "Just accept it." The bird-headed student blinked, before returning back to face his opponent. "I want a clean match. And, begin." Tokoyami sprinted towards Hatsune, who showed no sign of moving. Dark Shadow, again with the offensive attack. Even the emergence of the sentient quirk did nothing to abate her. She did, however, raise the old flashbulb, and pressed a button. Just as Akatani expected, a blinding flash exploded for a single moment, filling the visions of those who weren't able to cover their eyes in time with colors that obscured visibility. Dark Shadow, on instinct, shrieked and dove back into his master's body. As Tokoyami reeled, Hatsune whipped out her shotgun, and fired a single pellet. As with what happened to Ida before, the expanding pellet struck Tokoyami right in the stomach, propelling him right out of the ring into the concrete wall behind him. Hatsune puffed out the smoke from the gun. "Just so you know, you shouldn't disregard history. What might be deemed as old-fashioned might just save you at a moment's notice. So yeah, take it from me, and your life might just be a little bit more peaceful." Tokoyami Fumikage is out of bounds. Hatsune is the second runner-up of the sports festival. The applause was thunderous, as were the cheers. Akatani clapped, watching the pink-haired inventor bow and wave to the spectators. Once again, she has made history as the first non-heroics course student to make it to the top 3. Akatani could already predict support companies and pro-heroes falling over themselves to make deals with her. She's definitely moving up in the world from here on out. Akatani turned towards Tokoyami, who was slowly peeling himself off of the ground, clutching his stomach. He flew down to his classmate. "All good?" "Yes, thank you for your concern," the bird-headed student nodded. "What a rush of madness." "You did your best, Tokoyami." "I know. Still, it hurts a bit to lose." "I understand." This is it, dear listeners. We've come down to the last battle of the sports festival. The one who emerges victorious will bask in the glory of being the strongest in their cohort, for the rest of the year, that is. But that's besides the point. Are you ready for the final showdown? The spectators went absolutely crazy. Akatani, having taken his spot where Tokoyami stood earlier, released a calm breath. Across from him, the metal doors rumbled open. Facing off against the god of Jade Lightning who can strike down the unworthy with a snap of his fingers, Akatani Makumo, is the unbeaten king of explosions, destruction and mayhem, Bakugo Katsuki. Bakugo stomped out into the light, and took his position. The scowl on his face threatened to devolve into a snarl the moment he laid his bloodthirsty eyes on the outwardly indifferent Akatani. It didn't help matters when Akatani shifted his neutral gaze into one of contempt. "You think you're so powerful," Bakugo growled, "but unlike last time, I've become stronger. I'll destroy you completely, show to everyone watching that you are nothing but a mere bug squashed under my boot. I'll show you that I am the best, and I will come out victorious." Akatani didn't deign to give him a verbal response, merely rolling his eyes, which infuriated Bakugo even more. "I will emphasize this right here and now, I want a clean match. I can and will intervene if either one of you decide to cross the line and actually sought out to physically injure your opponent beyond what is considered acceptable." Midnight made clear, though Akatani knew this was more aimed towards Bakugo. And he also knew that the warning will be disregarded by the explosive Pomeranian. Well, he can't just let that son of a whore do whatever the hell he wants, could he? Time to knock him down to the depths of hell. Akatani's electricity crackled to life. Match start. Match start. Bakugo screamed bloody murder, using his explosions to propel himself towards Akatani at considerable speed. Akatani glared minutely, and pulled on his core. He disappeared in a flash of light and crackling of electricity, forcing Bakugo to pull the brakes. Akatani reformed behind the blonde, swinging his leg up and smashing his boot into the side of Bakugo's head in a roundhouse kick. As he reeled in the blast of pain, Akatani disappeared and appeared in front of Bakugo, punching the blonde in the stomach with enough force to fling him back several feet. Spitting out from the blow, Bakugo screamed, "Fuck you, goddamned piece of shit. I'll kill you. You've said that so many times I stopped counting a long time ago." Akatani deadpanned, dodging an exploding right fist, hand shooting up to grab the limb in a death grip. "I think you're just all words and no action at this stage." The purple-haired teen drove the point by kicking Bakugo's legs out of him, and throwing the blonde over his shoulder in a reminiscent move to the battle trial. As he hit the ground with a yell, Akatani retained his grip on his adversary's arm, bodily flinging the blonde several feet down the ring like a frisbee. Biting back groans of pain, Bakugo picked himself up, looking especially murderous. Screaming ferally, he released a long-distanced blast towards Akatani, who calmly activated his electric flight and shot into the air, dodging the incoming fireball. Akatani gazed at the explosive blonde impassively. Bakugo took that as an insult. "Stop looking down on me, you motherfucking cunt." "Looking down on you," the purple-haired teen huffed condescendingly. "Who do you think you are? A god? Someone who should be respected? You're neither of that, just an egotistical psychopath with a superiority complex who doesn't understand the concept of humility. Anyone with a decent, functional moral compass will naturally view you with contempt. But of course, you're too blind to see that for yourself." Bakugo screamed bloody murder, forming a glowing ball of light and throwing it at Akatani. Like a stun grenade exploding, there was a blinding flash of light. Akatani was thrown off kilter for a moment from trying to protect his retinas from frying, but he retaliated by pulling on his core again and disappearing, shrouded by the light. He reformed behind Bakugo, punching him into the head and blasting him forwards with a beam of electricity. Once again tasting concrete, Bakugo snarled like a wild animal. He unleashed explosion after explosion, forcing Akatani to dodge each one lest he get blown to smithereens. Yet the purple-haired teen was unfazed. After dodging each explosion, he made it a point to flick the bird each time at Bakugo, fueling the blonde's anger with unrepentant contempt. You think you're so fucking powerful enough to look down on me, that your quirk is so impressive that everyone should let you do whatever the hell you want, Bakugo growled viciously. I don't know why everyone is so fucking enamored about you. You are just a motherfucking, worthless piece of shit who has no place in this world. When I beat the ever-loving fuck out of you, I'll drive into your puny brain that you are nothing. Nothing more than a fucking bug underneath my boot. I will force you to bow to me, to show everyone watching that you will never amount to anything. A malicious smile stretched his lips, including that knockoff Pikachu. I don't know how you managed to keep him under a leash and lead him onto your fucking delusions, but after today, he'll see you for who you are and bite you like the dog he is. If Bakugo expected Akatani to lose his cool and attack him for that, he was sorely disappointed, and very confused. Akatani's expression did not appear to change in the slightest, as if he didn't even hear the insulting words in the first place. He also made no move to attack. But if Bakugo had looked closely, he would have noticed Akatani's irises disappearing under a glare of jade green. Kaminari, you're sparking. I know, Jairu. As much as Bakugo's words are beyond reconciliable, it's not worth the death penalty for murdering him, Yaoyorozu interjected. I have no intention of doing so, Kaminari shook his head. Akatani is going to do it for me. What? Akatani is going to royally fuck Bakugo up for this slight against me. I'm not sure if you can see, but you would notice that Akatanis have disappeared under a glaring light. Yaoyorozu created a pair of binoculars and aimed them towards her deputy. You're right, his eyes are just a glowing jade color. That means he's about to destroy Bakugo's ass in the coming minutes, Kaminari continued, sliding out of his seat, and if you value your eyesight, and possibly your life, I suggest you duck and cover. Seeing the blonde crouch down to the floor, face down and arms locked over his head, both girls quickly did the same, much to the confusion of their classmates. Akatani hadn't spoken a word in several moments now. What's the matter, fucker? Bakugo mocked, too overwhelmed by the truth? Realizing that you are actually nothing, up against a true victor like me? The purple-haired teen still said nothing, much to the explosive blonde's irritation, but he covered it with another malicious grin. TCH, fine then, I'll make this quick for the both of us. Bakugo lunged forward with an exploding fist, only to recoil in pain when a powerful bolt of electricity struck him and administered a painful shock to his nerves, temporarily paralyzing the entire arm. Akatani still regarded him with an impassive look, his hand outstretched. He finally spoke, do you ever stop to listen to the words you spew from that foul mouth of yours? Ha! I thought not, Akatani sighed. He was externally the perfect portrait of calm. But inside, the cavern of lava was boiling, hissing, and gradually rising to the surface. Electricity began to crackle dangerously over his form. If you ever took a single second to stop and listen to what you just said, you might just realize how much of a villain you are. Bakugo's face contorted with outrage. What, did you just call me? Akatani had a flashback to his encounter with Endeavor. Actually, come to think of it, Endeavor and Bakugo were not all that different from one another. They both had explosive tempers, abrasive personalities, egos the size of Mt. Everest, powerful quirks, and the drive to be number one, while ignoring collateral damage to others and surroundings. Only one was a fully grown adult and pro-hero, while the other was still an impressionable teenager. However, the similarities proved too close for Akatani to reconcile with. Even if it was an impossible task, Akatani knew he had to cut the bud before it could bloom. A villain, Bakugo, the purple-haired teen replied with mock mildness, unless your explosions have rendered your ears completely deaf, which may explain why you never follow the most simplest instructions on how to be a decent human being. Bakugo exploded, I'll fucking kill you. Like a rampaging bull, Bakugo launched towards his opponent. And like a matador, Akatani dodged effortlessly. Look at you, so quick to attack, and so quick to cause harm to others. I don't know about you, but aren't those hallmarks of what makes a villain? Akatani released a wave of electricity, electrocuting Bakugo and temporarily paralyzing him. You want to become the #1 hero, to surpass all might. But everything you do, your actions, your words, all point to being the #1 villain. So enlighten me, Bakugo, what is the discrepancy here? Akatani dodged a series of explosions. Oh wait, I am so blind. The discrepancy lies with you, Bakugo. Akatani threw a bolt of lightning at Bakugo's leg, forcing him to the ground. You hide your true self behind lofty aspirations and a powerful quirk, taking advantage of society's selective blindness to flashy and powerful quirks. But nothing can stay hidden forever. Right now, in front of the entire country and possibly the world, I will say this. Bakugo shakily stood up, snarling ferally. You are a petty, disgusting, abhorrent and most vilest example of the worst of humanity, to the point I debate whether or not I should even call you a human in the first place. You are the example of what parents tell their children to avoid, a scourge of society, a blight upon the world, and a disgrace against the heavens and all that is holy. The explosive blonde screamed like a banshee. He burst up into the air, the kick of his explosions lifting him as he went. Akatani rose a foot off the ground and spread out his hands. Like before in his match with Todoroki, the sky began to distort as static electricity was pulled from the atmosphere. Any remaining light fixtures that hadn't exploded previously met their end as their circuits overloaded and ruptured, the electrical currents draining out and hurtling towards Akatani, coalescing into a glowing ball of light. People like you are the reason why so many others suffer, not just as a consequence of your quirk, but when they become your targets to bully and hurt just for you inflate your ego or to get a boost of confidence to hide your insecurity. And that is just for people with quirks. I can't imagine what you did to people who didn't have quirks to protect themselves against scumbags like you. Airborne, Bakugo began to spin, creating a vortex of air that was rapidly gaining strength and speed. You must have taken delight in rubbing their faces in the fact that they were quirkless, to force them down into inferiority just for something out of their control, to hurt and injure them because of your fucked up thinking that they are less human than you. I'm not even surprised if you told some of them to end their lives because you think they are not worth the space they use in this world. The ball of light had grown to the size of a beach ball and showed no sign of stopping. Outside of the stadium, further electrical circuits from the surrounding area had their electricity drained, fluctuating power to most of the buildings in the affected area. Bakugo could now be barely seen in the swirling tornado of air and dirt he was creating. How it, sir? You call yourself a hero, but heroes don't destroy lives. Akatani curled his hands around the ball of light as it shook violently. No, as far as I know, you are nothing but a fucking monster. Impumpeya. Monsters like you have no place this world. So do all that is good and just a favor, will you? Pray that you will become a decent human being in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof. Kakun. Bakugo's eyes widened, his spinning suddenly halting. That momentary hesitation was all that Akatani needed. His glowing eyes narrowed. There was a pause. And the ring exploded into a dazzling, blinding light that rivaled that of the sun. People screamed and wailed, falling to the ground to shield their eyes from the searing supernova. Kaminari, Jiru, and Yaoyorozu further curled into themselves to keep the light away from their retinas. Then there was deafening clap of thunder, and the wild crackling of electricity at immense speeds. For only God knows how long, that was the world of those watching the festival live, until the heavens granted them mercy, and the light began to fade. With the receding light, came visions obscured by color, spinning heads and noise of confusion. People began to slowly get up, grabbing onto things to steady themselves and clear the temporary blindness. Up in the commentary booth, President Mike was slowly picking himself and Aizawa from the floor, where he had been protecting his mummified friend from the worst of the light. It was a mistake to make these eye holes, Aizawa grumbled. President Mike stumbled over to the microphone. Well, despite Akatani-kun's valiant attempt to blind us all, is everyone okay though? Noises of affirmation came from the crowd below. So, can anyone see enough to know who won? My eyes are still recovering. Down on the ring, Midnight winced as she picked herself up on her dais. In her haste to protect her eyes from the blinding supernova, she was sure she twisted something on her way down. Making a note to see Recovery Girl once this was over, she shook her head wildly to clear the colors from her vision. Around the stadium, there were cheers going off like dynamite. When her vision cleared enough, she could see why. On the ring, looking decidedly exhausted, was Akatani. Across the stadium, laying sprawled out over 2 rows of seats with blood leaking from a gash on his temple and various cuts all across any exposed skin, was an unconscious Bakugo. For the R18 heroine, that was all the answer she needed. Bakugo Katsuki is unable to continue. Akatani Makumo is the winner of this year's sports festival.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.